Tonight, Miss Marple steps into the heart of history, a mystery buried for centuries beneath the fall of Constantinople. Join her as she uncovers forgotten truths, hidden betrayals, and the last secret that changed the world. Welcome to the series of Driftaway Tales. I am your host Elias. If you are a lover of historical fiction, then please like this video and subscribe this channel. Chapter 1: The Letter That Should Not Exist. The morning had begun with all the gentle predictability Miss Marple quietly enjoyed. The sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of her sitting room, lighting the dust motes like drifting flecks of gold. Her teapot of Earl Grey sat steaming beside a small plate of currant biscuits. A sparrow tapped twice on the window glass before hopping away, as if delivering some private message of the garden's own. Miss Marple was not expecting any excitement. After her recent lecture at the university, the pleasant but exhausting engagement, she had intended to spend a peaceful week at home. A little gardening, a reread of Marcus Aurelius, and perhaps a polite argument with Colonel Melrose over the best pruning month for old roses. But fate had a way of finding her. The knock at her door was light, almost cautious. Her postman stood on the porch, holding an envelope with uncommon care. "Registered foreign mail for you, miss," he said, signing the slip. "Strangest looking thing I've seen all week." The envelope was old, far older than any modern postal regulation would approve of. The paper felt rough, handmade, and carried the faint smell of smoke and ancient dust, but the most striking detail was the seal, not wax, but a pressed red pigment shaped like a Byzantine double-headed eagle. "Curious," Miss Marple murmured, turning the envelope over with her gloved fingers. She thanked the postman, closed the door, and stepped back into the softness of her sitting room. There she sat, spine straight, hands steady, as she broke the seal with the deliberate ease of someone who had spent her life observing the unusual. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, yellowed, fragile, but unmistakably old. And yet, one line on it was written in modern black ink. Miss Marple frowned gently. Ancient documents did not share space with fresh ink, not unless someone wanted them to. The parchment itself seemed to belong to the 15th century. Its script was handwritten in a tight, slanted Latin, scholarly, careful, the kind produced by someone accustomed to writing by candlelight. She recognized traces of a Venetian scribe's hand, the type known for chronicling events during the final days of Byzantium, and the content confirmed it. It described the tension inside Constantinople during the last week before the city fell. The writer spoke of sleepless nights, dwindling supplies, and the constant pounding of Ottoman cannons against the ancient walls. Miss Marple read quietly, her lips tightening. It was not that she doubted history, no. She respected it deeply. But she also understood that history was written by those who survived, and survival often carried bias. Then she came upon the line. The one written in modern ink. It read, "The truth did not fall with the city." Miss Marple's pale blue eyes widened slightly. She read it again, then a third time, tracing it with the edge of her finger. The ink was fresh, no more than a month old, she guessed, and the handwriting was neat but firm. The way someone writes when they intend to be believed. But why write that line on such a fragile, valuable document? Why send it to her? And from where? On the back of the parchment was a brief note, also modern. "If you seek the truth, come to the city where empires died. Istanbul awaits, a friend of history." Miss Marple leaned back in her chair. She had solved enough mysteries in her lifetime to recognize invitation from manipulation. This was not a simple historical curiosity, it was a summons. Yet, something in her stirred, a familiar spark. The one she felt when threads dangled loose and stories refused to align neatly. She stood up, walking slowly to her bookshelf. There she pulled down an old reference volume, Byzantine Chronicles, flipping to the chapter on Niccolò Barbaro, one of the Venetian eyewitnesses to the fall of Constantinople. The handwriting on the parchment matched Barbaro's style remarkably so. But Barbaro's diary had never contained a page with such a phrase. She knew, because long ago, a younger Miss Marple had read it thoroughly on a rainy winter afternoon, which meant only two possibilities existed. 1. Someone had forged the page with extraordinary skill. 2. The parchment was genuine, but someone had tampered with it recently. Both possibilities troubled her. Miss Marple made herself a fresh cup of tea, though she barely touched it. She paced her sitting room slowly, quietly, like a cat weighing the distance to a new perch. Her cane tapped softly on the wooden floorboards. Most people her age would have ignored such a letter. They would have dismissed it as a scholar's prank or a collector's eccentric gesture. But Miss Marple had never been most people. She believed in details. She believed in intention. And above all, she believed that when something inexplicable arrives uninvited into one's life, it is rarely meaningless. By noon, she had taken out her small leather suitcase and laid it open on her bed. She folded her coat, her second-best hat, a sensible pair of shoes, a notebook, and a travel guide to Istanbul. How interesting life becomes, she whispered to herself, when one is nearly certain it should be quiet. She wrote a brief note to the vicar, informing him she would be away for a few days, possibly more. She left it with her neighbour, Mrs. Weatherby, who immediately tried to fuss over her, but was gently dismissed with assurances of good health. Miss Marple booked her ticket for Istanbul. That night, she barely slept, not from fear, but from curiosity. It had been a long time since she felt a mystery building itself around her quietly, patiently, like fog gathering on a river. The next morning, Miss Marple boarded the flight with the same calm composure with which she had once stepped into drawing rooms filled with murder suspects. Flying had never frightened her. She found it oddly soothing to see the world from above, as if all human troubles were small puzzles scattered beneath clouds. When the plane descended over Istanbul, the view struck her with unexpected emotion. The Bosphorus shimmered like a silver blade. The minarets of the city rose like slender pillars of history, and the domes glowed under the afternoon sun. Far in the distance, she saw the faint outline of the ancient city walls, the same walls that had endured siege after siege until 1453. The city where the Roman Empire had finally died. The city where East met West, and where 1,000 stories whispered through stone. When she stepped off the plane, the warm air carried scents of spice, sea breeze, and old stone. She felt history before she even touched it. Outside, a driver held a small sign, Miss Marple, welcome to Istanbul. She approached cautiously. You are expecting me? She asked. Yes, madam, the man said in accented English. A friend arranged your pickup. A friend, she repeated softly. She knew better than to assume goodwill, but she entered the car. She would learn more by moving forward than by retreating. The city blurred past the window markets, masks, narrow streets filled with life. She wondered who had summoned her. A historian, a collector, a conspirator, or someone with darker intentions. The driver stopped near Sultanahmet Square. Your hotel, madam. She stepped out, gazing at the massive dome of Hagia Sophia across the street, a monument standing unchanged through empires. Her mystery had just begun. Miss Marple checked into her modest hotel and refreshed herself before dinner. She sat by the window, watching the evening lights spread across the ancient city. The call to prayer drifted through the air like a soft echo of centuries. She placed the parchment on the table before her. There was something she had not noticed earlier. At the bottom corner, nearly invisible under old stains, was a faint symbol scratched lightly into the parchment. A half circle, with 3 vertical strokes. Miss Marple's heart tightened with recognition. It was the sign used by certain Venetian scribes to mark unofficial or secret records notes that were not meant to enter public archives. The lost Chronicle. She whispered the words without meaning to. Then she saw something else, near the edge of the parchment, In microscopic modern pencil, someone had written, "Do not trust the first helper you meet." Miss Marple looked up sharply. A chilling realization settled over her. Someone was already here. Someone knew she had come. Someone was waiting for her to make the next move. And Miss Marple, with her quiet spine of steel, decided she would. Tomorrow she would begin her investigation with a single destination. Hagia Sophia, the heart of the old empire. The place where truth, if it survived at all, would still whisper beneath the stones. She folded the parchment carefully, placed it under her pillow, and turned off the lamp. In the silence of the night, Istanbul breathed around her, an ancient city cradling secrets older than any crime she had ever pursued. And Miss Marple, eyes closed but mind alert, prepared herself. The past was calling, and she had answered. Chapter 2. Arrival in the City of Shadows. The morning air in Istanbul was cool, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and stone warmed by centuries of sun. Miss Marple stepped out of her hotel with the precise steadiness of someone who knew her path might be unpredictable but was never unplanned. She wore her modest grey coat appropriate for walking and carried a slim notebook, which she had written only 3 words so far: Hagia Sophia first. The city was already alive. Street vendors arranged trays of simit rings, their golden crusts glistening. Pigeons swirled in sudden flight, scattering like broken fragments of a mosaic. The tram bell dinged lightly as it rolled through Sultanahmet Square. Tourists murmured, locals hurried. The world spun forward, as it always did. But Miss Marple felt something older moving beneath it. A hum, faint yet constant, as if the stones themselves retained the echoes of fallen emperors. She walked slowly toward Hagia Sophia. Its immense dome dominated the skyline like a suspended world, and the minarets flanking it pierced the sky with quiet authority. Sunlight softened the massive stone walls, their colors shifting between rose and warm gold. As she approached the courtyard, she paused. A young man stood at the far end, leaning casually against the railing. He wore a dark jacket, his expression unreadable, but his gaze flicked to her with an alertness she did not like. Miss Marple lowered her eyes, pretending not to notice. She had learned long ago that the most dangerous observer is the one who believes he is unseen. She continued her walk, her pace unhurried. There was work to do, and she would not begin by showing weakness. Inside Hagia Sophia, Miss Marple felt a quiet wave of awe settle over her. No amount of reading prepared one for the physical presence of the ancient basilica --mask--museum--mask again. Sunlight filtered through high windows, casting shimmering columns of light that danced with drifting dust. The marble floors bore grooves from centuries of footsteps, Byzantine, Ottoman, and now modern. She moved slowly beneath the immense dome, its golden interior shining like captured sunlight. As her eyes adjusted, she studied the mosaic panels, partly revealed, partly hidden artifacts of an empire that refused complete erasure. But Miss Marple was not here for architecture. She was here for traces of a message. She took the parchment from her handbag and compared its edge to the worn carvings on certain pillars. The ancient symbol on the page, the half circle with 3 vertical strokes, had to be connected to this place. A tall woman with a crimson scarf approached her. "You are looking very closely at these stones," she said in English touched with a Turkish lilt. Miss Marple smiled gently. Old stone always has stories to tell. The woman studied her for a moment, then stepped closer. "You are here for a history. You should speak to someone who knows it well." "And who might that be?" "My colleague, Dr. Salim Oslan. He's a specialist in the final days of Constantinople. He gives private tour to devoted researchers." Miss Marple raised a mild eyebrow. "And how would you know I am a researcher?" The woman smiled without warmth. "Because ordinary visitors do not carry parchment in their handbags." Miss Marple's fingers tightened slowly, invisibly. She had not shown the parchment openly, only glimpsed it privately. This meant one thing. Someone had been watching her far more closely than she realized. Still, she kept her expression pleasant. A private tour would be very kind. The woman scribbled a name, an address on a small card. You will find him near the old city walls Blachernae district. Go this afternoon. As she walked away, Miss Marple noticed her join the young man she had seen earlier. The two exchanged a brief look before disappearing among the pillars. The message was clear. Miss Marple was being guided. But by whom and toward what? Not one to allow manipulation without resistance. Miss Marple began her own quiet investigation. She moved toward a side aisle where fewer tourists wandered. She knelt lightly near a cluster of carved stone slabs, running her fingers over their surfaces with the gentle care of someone touching a sleeping creature. Then she saw it. A tiny inscription scratched so faintly it might have been overlooked for centuries. A half circle, 3 vertical strokes. The same symbol. Her heart beat once, firmly. This symbol marks secret records of Venetian scribes' documents never meant to be part of official history. If these marks were here, in Hagia Sophia itself, then the author of the parchment she received must have known this place intimately, and perhaps recently. But something else caught her attention. The grooves of the carving were clean, not weathered. Not old, they were made within the last few years. Miss Marple wrote in her notebook, symbol carved recently. Purpose, message, warning, trail. Just as she finished writing, she became aware of someone standing behind her, a polite cough. She turned to see an older man with wire-framed glasses and a trimmed grey beard. He wore a guide's badge on his jacket. Pardon, madam, he said gently. We do not encourage visitors to touch the walls. Quite right, Miss Marple said, rising. My apologies. But the man did not move. He looked at her with an intensity that surprised her. You have come for something ancient, he said softly. But be careful, ancient things have shadows. Miss Marple held his gaze. And you, sir? Do you speak of shadows from experience? The guide gave a thin, sad smile. Experience, yes, and regret. He walked away before she could ask more. Miss Marple watched him go. This city was full of watchers. And not all were enemies. By noon, Miss Marple left Hagia Sophia and walked toward a quiet outdoor cafe overlooking the hippodrome. She ordered a light lunch not because she was hungry, but because lunch gave her a reason to sit still and think. She reviewed her morning, the woman with the crimson scarf, the man leaning against the railing, the guide who spoke of shadows, the symbol freshly carved, the invitation to meet Dr. Selim Oslan. None of it was random. Someone wanted her moving through the city. Someone wanted her to follow a path they had chosen. But Miss Marple never walked paths laid by others without first looking for the footprints beneath them. A waiter approached with tea. Madam, someone left this for you. Miss Marple accepted the folded note cautiously. It contained only a single sentence. Arslan is not who he claims to be. No signature, no indication of its sender. She looked around the cafe calmly, eyes scanning faces. Everyone seemed perfectly ordinary. Perfectly ordinary often meant perfectly suspicious. She tucked the note away and finished her tea. Whether Arslan was trustworthy or not, she would meet him not to follow him, but to study him. There was danger here. But Miss Marple had never found danger as frightening as ignorance. By late afternoon, Miss Marple made her way toward the Blachernae district. The tram rattled past ancient ruins and narrow winding streets. As she stepped off at the foot of the old city walls, she felt the centuries pressing close. The Blachernae walls were different from the rest, vast, uneven, marked by battles and desperate repairs. These were the stones that had witnessed the final break of Constantinople. As she walked beside them, her cane tapping softly, she sensed a presence behind her. Not threatening, simply watching. She continued without turning. If the watcher meant harm, they would reveal themselves soon enough. She arrived at the address written on the card, a modest archaeological office, its sign faded, its windows lined with dust. She knocked gently. A man opened the door. He was tall, thin, with hollow cheeks and dark eyes that studied her too intensely. "I am Dr. Selim Oslan," he said. "You must be Miss Marple. I have been expecting you." Miss Marple smiled politely. "I believe," she said gently, "that a great many people have been expecting me." Oslan stepped aside, gesturing her in. "Come," he said. "You and I must speak of the night Constantinople fell and of the Chronicle that vanished with it." Miss Marple entered the dim room, knowing one thing with certainty. She had walked into the next circle of the mystery, and the shadows of the past were growing thicker around her. Chapter 3. The Guide with Half a Story. Dr. Selim Arslan's office smelled faintly of dust, old leather, and documents that had not seen daylight in years. Shelves overloaded with books leaned like tired soldiers holding the line. Maps of the ancient city were pinned to the walls, their edges curling with age. Miss Marple paused near the doorway, letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior. She sensed immediately that Oslan was the sort of man who lived more comfortably with ghosts than with the living. "Please," he said, gesturing to a narrow wooden chair. "Sit." Miss Marple sat slowly, her cane resting beside her. Oslan lowered himself opposite her with the restless energy of someone who had waited too long to speak. "You received a letter," he began without preamble, "a page from a forgotten manuscript." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted the slightest inch. "You seem very certain." His gaze sharpened. "Because only someone who held such a page would come looking for me. And only someone who understands the danger of that page would arrive alone." Miss Marple folded her hands neatly. "And may I ask, Dr. Oslan, how you came to know of this page?" Oslan hesitated a flicker, brief but telling. "Because I have been searching for it for many years," he said. "The fragment belongs to the Chronicle of the Last Witness, a diary written by a Venetian scribe who was inside Constantinople on the final night. A diary that most historians believe is a myth," Miss Marple said softly. Oslan leaned forward. "Not a myth, a suppressed truth." The phrase hung in the air like incense. Miss Marple glanced at the maps behind him. "I assume you are familiar with suppression in more than the academic sense." Oslan gave a humorless smile. "You are observant. Good. You will need that. There are those powerful collectors, political actors, even historians who do not wish the truth of 1453 to surface." Miss Marple chose her next question with care. "And are you among them, Dr. Oslan?" His eyes widened, almost offended. "No. I am trying to protect the truth, but I am not alone. There are others searching for the Chronicle, and they are not as gentle with their methods." She thought of the woman with the crimson scarf, the young man at the railing, the scratched symbol in Hagia Sophia. "Tell me," she said calmly, "what exactly does this Chronicle claim?" Oslan leaned back, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "It claims the city did not fall because the walls broke, but because the people inside the walls did." Miss Marple felt a chill, not of fear, but of intrigue, a betrayal, a fracture from within. History always simplified what human nature complicated, but Oslan was not finished. "And your page," he added, "contains a portion of that truth." Miss Marple met his gaze with quiet firmness. "Then you must tell me, what part of the truth would compel someone to carve secret symbols inside Hagia Sophia?" Oslan froze. "You saw the symbol?" "Yes." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Then they know you are looking." Oslan stood abruptly, pacing in a narrow strip between the shelves and the desk. Miss Marple watched him without changing her posture. He seemed less a scholar now, and more a man trapped inside his own fears. "You must understand," he said. "The Chronicle accuses one of the most respected Byzantine commanders of treachery. A name revered by modern historians. A name that reshapes the narrative if tarnished." "And who might this be?" Miss Marple asked. Oslan hesitated again. "I will tell you. But first, you must understand the stakes. The fall of Constantinople shaped the world. It is not simply an event, it is a foundation. Remove one stone, and the entire structure shifts." Miss Marple nodded. "Truth often does." Arslan exhaled, as though surrendering to inevitability. The Chronicle claims that Emperor Constantine's most trusted officer Lucas Notaras secretly negotiated with the Ottomans. He delayed crucial defences. He weakened the final stand. History paints him as a tragic figure, Miss Marple noted. Because history never saw this document. Arslan reached into a drawer and pulled out a photograph. He handed it to her. It showed a fragment of parchment similar to the one she had received, only more damaged. The same handwriting, the same Venetian slant, and at the bottom corner the same symbol. Miss Marple studied it carefully. "Where did you find this?" "In the monastery library in the quarter of Fina," Arslan said. "Before the room was sealed and the document hidden." Hidden by whom? By someone who feared what it revealed. Miss Marple placed the photo gently on the desk. "And what do you believe, Dr. Arslan?" "I believe the Chronicle is true," he said, "and that someone has been searching for the remaining pages for decades. Someone who will do anything to possess or destroy them." Miss Marple considered this silently. "My page suggests the truth did not fall with the city, meaning someone intended the truth to survive." Arslan nodded. "Someone inside the siege left clues behind, perhaps knowing future historians would need them." Miss Marple felt the weight of that thought. A message from the past, a warning from the present. A dangerous combination, but something else troubled her. "Dr. Arslan," she said, "if you are the guardian of this truth, why did I receive a page and not you?" Arslan's expression tightened again. "Because," he said slowly, "someone wants you involved." Miss Marple's instinct stirred. Arslan was telling truth, but not all of it. She could feel gaps, small but deliberate, like missing stitches in an otherwise perfect seam. "Let us be practical," she said. "Someone sent me a page. Someone else followed me. And someone in Hagia Sophia carved the scribe's symbol recently." "Yes," Arslan said. "And yet," she continued softly, "you claim to want to protect the Chronicle, but you also claim it has been hidden. Are you searching for it? Or trying to keep it buried?" Arslan's eyes flashed. "Madam, I have dedicated my life to finding it, or keeping others from finding it." He flinched. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Forgive me. I mean no accusation. But as an elderly woman who has spent her life observing people, I have learned to separate what is said from what is felt." Arslan turned away, rubbing his forehead. "I am trying to protect it," he said, "at last, but I am not the only one who knows it exists. There is another." Miss Marple waited. "A rival historian," he continued, "Dr. Layla Corran. Brilliant, ambitious, dangerous. She believes the Chronicle disproves her own theories on the city's final hours. She has supporters, money, influence. The woman in the crimson scarf." Miss Marple asked. "Yes," he said quietly. "She has been watching you since the moment you arrived." So Miss Marple was being used as bait, to draw attention, to flush out the missing pages. But whose game was she part of? She looked up calmly. "And do you believe Dr. Corran sent me the parchment?" "No." Arslan shook his head. "Corran would never share evidence. She hoards it." "No. Someone else sent the page. Someone who knew I would follow its trail," Miss Marple murmured. "Someone who trusts my judgment more than yours." Arslan did not answer. He did not need to. Miss Marple left Arslan's office with more questions than answers. The air outside was cooler now, carrying the scent of approaching evening. The old Blachernae walls loomed behind her, their massive stones roughened by time and battles. She traced the line of the walls with her eyes, imagining the fear, the exhaustion, the desperation of those last days. And she imagined the scribes' silent witnesses writing truths that emperors would never have allowed. She walked along the footpath, passing locals who barely gave the walls a glance. To them, history was background. To her, it was puzzle. Suddenly, she paused. On a portion of the wall half concealed by climbing vines, she saw it again, the symbol, a half circle. 3 vertical strokes. But this one was different. It was accompanied by faint Latin letters. She leaned closer. 2 words carved roughly, almost furtively. Ultima vera, the last truth. Miss Marple's heart steadied. Whoever left this message wanted it found not by everyone, but by someone who knew how to look. She wrote the words in her notebook. Someone was leaving her breadcrumbs through history. But for what purpose? As she turned away from the wall, she felt movement. A shadow slipped behind a cluster of trees. Someone was watching her. She continued walking, her back straight, her steps deliberate. The watcher followed. Miss Marple walked toward the nearest tram stop, the watcher trailing at a carefully measured distance. She did not hurry. She did not turn around. She had learned long ago that fear clouded judgment, and she needed her wits clear. She reached a quiet stretch of road bordered by ancient ruins and wild grass. The evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Footsteps behind her quickened slightly. Then a voice soft, hurried, "Miss Marple." She stopped. The watcher stepped forward, but kept a respectful distance. It was the older guide from Hagia Sophia. He looked around nervously before speaking. "You should not be here alone," he whispered. "This city is full of eyes. Some seek truth. Others seek silence." Miss Marple regarded him calmly. "And which do you seek, sir?" He swallowed. "The truth, and your safety. You must listen carefully." "I am listening." He lowered his voice further. "Do not trust Aslan. Do not trust his enemies. The Chronicle, if found, will expose more than betrayal in 1453. It will expose betrayal in our time." Miss Marple's pulse did not quicken, but her mind sharpened to a fine point. "And why?" she asked gently. "Do you tell me this?" "Because," he said, "someone believes you can solve what scholars cannot." "Who? That?" He whispered. "You must discover yourself." Miss Marple studied him. Then the guide stepped back, fear in his eyes. "I cannot stay. Watch the city walls at sunrise. A message waits for you." He disappeared into the growing dusk. Miss Marple remained still for several seconds, absorbing his words. Betrayal in 1453. Betrayal now. A chronicle that threatened more than history. Slowly, she turned toward the tram stop. She knew only one thing for certain. This mystery was no longer simply historical. Something in Istanbul was alive, moving, hidden in shadows of old stone. And Miss Marple intended to follow it to the end. Chapter 4. Secrets beneath Hagia Sophia. Miss Marple rose before dawn, long before the city shook off its sleep. The guide's final words from the previous evening echoed clearly in her mind. "Watch the city walls at sunrise. A message waits for you." She dressed in her usual composed fashion, her practical grey coat and sturdy shoes. She left the hotel quietly and walked toward the Blachernae walls as the sky softened from black to indigo. Few people were out, only a stray cat near a quiet cafe, and a pair of fishermen already casting lines into the Golden Horn. When she reached the ancient walls, the city was still hushed. The enormous stones towered above her in cold silence, as if absorbing the first pale ribbon of morning light. She moved slowly along the wall, her steps careful, her cane tapping lightly on uneven stone. Then she found it, a small piece of parchment wedged into a crevice, held in place by a broken shard of rock. She removed it delicately. On one side, someone had drawn the familiar symbol, a half circle with 3 vertical strokes. On the reverse, beneath Hagia Sophia, the second clue. No signature, no instructions, but Miss Marple did not need either. She tucked the parchment safely into her bag and stepped back to observe the walls once more. There were no footprints, though the ground was soft from the early morning dew, which meant the courier had come before dawn. Someone who moved with purpose and caution. Miss Marple understood one thing with perfect clarity. The person guiding her was closer to the truth than either Aslan or Dr. Corin, perhaps even closer than they realized. She began walking toward Hagia Sophia as the first rays of full sunrise lit the city in gold. By the time Miss Marple reached Hagia Sophia, the morning had fully arrived. The courtyard outside was stirring, vendors opening their carts, pigeons circling lazily, early visitors trickling in. But something felt different, a stillness inside the movement, a tension beneath the calm. She entered the great structure once more. The moment she stepped under the immense dome, she felt the familiar reverence sweep through her. Light cascaded from high windows, shifting with dust particles like drifting relics. But Miss Marple did not linger. She walked toward the side aisles again, but this time her eyes were searching for something else: an entry, a staircase, an opening. She found none. Instead, she found a young guard watching her with too much interest. His expression was not unfriendly, but his eyes did not blink when she passed. She continued walking until she reached the corner where she had seen the symbol carved the day before. The mark remained faint but unmistakable. Miss Marple leaned forward, running her gloved fingers along the stone. Then her fingers brushed something new, something slight but deliberate. A draft, cold, flowing from a nearly invisible seam in the wall. She placed her ear against the marble. The faintest hum echoed behind it. Possibly a passage, a hollow chamber, or an old ventilation tunnel. Well now, she whispered. How very curious. She stepped back and looked again at the symbol. Was it a signal, a landmark, a warning? Before she could consider further, a voice approached from behind. Miss Marple, a man said gently. She turned. It was Aslan. Only this time, he looked anxious, almost frantic. You must leave, he said quietly. Now, Miss Marple tilted her head. And why is that? Because someone knows you were looking for the Chronicle. And they know you came here. Miss Marple folded her arms lightly. And how would they know that unless you told them? Arslan's expression cracked momentarily. I'm not your enemy, Miss Marple. Then you must stop behaving like someone who is. He lowered his voice. Dr. Corran's men are here. They watch the entrances. If they see you heading below, Miss Marple repeated softly. Aslan froze. You said below, she said. So there is something beneath Hagia Sophia. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy. Full of names unsaid, and secrets unshared. Finally, Aslan sighed. There is an old cistern beneath the structure, forgotten by many, used by scribes centuries ago for secret meetings. It is possible the Chronicle or part of it was kept down there. Then I must go, Miss Marple said. Arslan's eyes widened in alarm. You cannot. It is dangerous. Miss Marple gave him a look so gentle, so polite, and yet so immovable that he stepped back involuntarily. I appreciate your concern, Dr. Aslan, she said, but I have no intention of turning back. Miss Marple found the entrance, where Arslan's eyes had lingered, a narrow, half-hidden doorway partially blocked by a display barrier. The guard who watched her earlier remained near the opposite pillar, pretending to examine a mosaic, but in truth observing everything. Miss Marple waited until a group of tourists stepped between them, then slid behind the barrier with surprising nimbleness for her age. The doorway was smaller than she expected, its frame worn smooth by centuries of forgotten traffic. She pushed it open gently. A rush of cold, damp air met her. The stone staircase stretched downward, disappearing into darkness lit only by weak, flickering bulbs along the walls. The air carried a faint smell of mold, old water, and time. Miss Marple descended slowly, gripping her cane, her steps careful but unwavering. Each footfall echoed lightly. The temperature dropped, the silence thickened. At the bottom of the staircase, she entered a vast underground cistern. Stone pillars rose from the water, like silent sentinels. The shallow rippling reflected faint glimmers of light from the ceiling lamps. The atmosphere was ancient, sacred, almost untouched. As Miss Marple walked forward, she noticed fresh footprints near the water's edge, boots, not the shoes of tourists. Someone had been here, recently, very recently, and then she saw it. Another symbol scratched into one of the pillars, The same half circle, the same strokes. But beneath it, a new mark. A small arrow pointing deeper into the cistern. Miss Marple followed it. The cistern narrowed into a passageway. Miss Marple moved through it cautiously, mindful of slick stones. She walked with the careful confidence of someone used to physical fragility, but not mental weakness. The passage opened into a small chamber with a vaulted ceiling, dimly lit by a single bulb. On a stone pedestal in the center lay a wooden box, small, ornate, weathered by age. Byzantine craftsmanship, metal hinges shaped like stylized wings. Miss Marple approached it slowly. The box was locked, but slightly ajar, as if someone had opened it recently. She lifted the lid gently. Inside were several rolled fragments of parchment. Her breath caught, not with fear, but with clarity. The Chronicle, not the whole, but pieces, important pieces. She reached inside and stopped. A faint rustle. A shadow shifting against the wall. Someone was here. She turned calmly. The guard from above stood at the entrance of the chamber. His face no longer polite or vacant. His eyes were sharp, predatory. "So," he said softly, "you found it." Miss Marple's expression did not change. Her voice remained gentle. "It seems I did." The man stepped closer. "Give me the fragments." "I think not," she replied. "You don't understand what you have," he said. "Those pages would destroy everything." "And yet," Miss Marple murmured, "here you are, desperate to possess them." His jaw tightened. He moved toward her too quickly. But Miss Marple, with remarkable calm, stepped backward and knocked her cane sharply against the pedestal. The sound echoed loudly through the chamber. For a moment, the guard hesitated. A voice called from behind him, "Stop." Aslan burst into the chamber, breathless. His eyes darted to the fragments, then to the guard. "You fool," Aslan hissed. "You'll ruin everything if you act here." The guard shot Aslan a furious look, but he stopped. Miss Marple absorbed all of it in silence. Enemies were interrupting one another, which meant neither trusted the other, and both feared what she now held. Miss Marple closed the wooden box gently, not taking the fragments, but marking their location mentally. "I believe my presence complicates your private quarrel," she said in her mild voice. "I shall take my leave. You're not going anywhere," the guard snapped. But Aslan raised a hand. "Let her go." The guard turned on him. "Are you mad?" Aslan's voice dropped to a deadly calm. "If she disappears now, everyone will know it was us. The whole city will burn with suspicion. Do you want that?" The guard hesitated. Miss Marple took the opportunity. She stepped past them, her cane tapping firmly on the stone floor. Down the passageway, up the staircase, toward the growing light. Neither man followed immediately. They were too busy arguing. By the time she reached the main hall of Hagia Sophia, her pulse had steadied. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her discovery had shifted the balance. Coran's people were searching. Aslan was hiding something. The unknown guide was leaving clues, and she was now the only one who knew where the Chronicle fragments waited in the dark. Miss Marple stepped outside into the afternoon sun. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The city's secrets were no longer buried. They were rising, and so was the danger. Chapter 5. The Blachernae Wall Mystery. Miss Marple walked away from Hagia Sophia with a controlled pace, her cane tapping softly on the cobblestones. The city felt different now, more alert. Eyes followed her more openly. Footsteps lingered too closely behind. Istanbul, with all its beauty, had awakened into a city of watchers. She headed north toward the Blachernae district again, drawn not only by the next clue but by instinct. The underground chamber had revealed enough to unsettle two dangerous people at once. That alone meant she was getting close. As she approached the old city walls, she noticed the morning bustle slowly shifting into its midday rhythm. Children kicked a football near the lower ruins. Vendors arranged trinkets on cloths spread across the pavement. Cats lounged on sun-worn stones as if they owned the empire. Life went on as usual. Except life never felt usual when one was being hunted. Miss Marple walked along the base of the towering walls until she reached the section where she had found the earlier message Ultima Vera. She examined the surrounding stones with deliberate slowness. Her eyes moved over cracks, joints, shadows. She had spent years studying the unspoken language of clues, and she knew that secrets, once begun, tended to unravel in patterns. Then she saw it, a small sliver of parchment tucked beneath a loose stone, almost invisible, unless one was looking carefully. Miss Marple removed it gently. This one was slightly different, a drawing. A crude sketch of a tower, split into two sections, and below it, written in Latin, Sic cessidit murus, thus the wall fell. Miss Marple traced the tower with her finger. It resembled part of the old Blachernae fortifications, specifically the Pentapagon Tower, which had once guarded the weakest point of the wall. She looked up at the real tower in front of her. The stones were cracked, uneven, patched through centuries. Something had happened here, something violent, something decisive, the Chronicle's claim of betrayal. The inscription on the parchment, the markings in Hagia Sophia, all pointed to this place. But something else tugged at her attention. At the base of the wall, hidden behind a dusty shrub, something metallic glinted in the sunlight. Miss Marple knelt carefully and brushed away the dry leaves. It was a tiny clasp bronze, old yet recently disturbed. Shaped like the double-headed eagle of Byzantium. Her breath tightened slightly. This was a marker, a deliberate reminder, a message that the truth of the fall lay not only in history books, but in the stones that once crumbled. As she rose, she became aware of footsteps behind her, not hurried, not hesitant. Purposeful. She turned. It was Dr. Layla Corrin. Dr. Corrin stood with impeccable posture, her crimson scarf catching the breeze like a flag of challenge. Her dark eyes gleamed with cold intelligence. She was younger than Aslan, sharper, and far less patient. "So," Corrin said, her tone smooth as glass, "I knew you would follow the clues." Miss Marple offered a polite nod. "You seem quite confident of my actions." "When one understands human curiosity," Corrin replied, "one can predict nearly everything. Curiosity," Miss Marple said gently, "is quite different from manipulation." Corrin smiled thinly. "Oh, Miss Marple, I did not leave you the clues. I simply follow the same trail you do." "Indeed?" Miss Marple asked. "Then tell me, what do you believe lies beneath these walls?" Corrin stepped closer, eyes narrowing with hunger for knowledge. "The real reason Constantinople fell. The Chronicle names the traitor, the one inside the city who weakened the defenses. I intend to prove his identity and destroy his legacy." Miss Marple asked. Corrin did not deny it. Instead, she leaned in slightly. "You are clever, but you are in the middle of a battleground between scholars far more dangerous than you imagine." Miss Marple said nothing. Corrin continued. "Aslan is not trying to protect the Chronicle. He's trying to hide part of it, because it destroys his own thesis." This surprised Miss Marple only mildly. Historians were often more territorial than generals. "And what of the man in the underground chamber?" Miss Marple asked. "Your associate." Corrin's eyes flashed. "He is not mine. He is a parasite, someone who attaches himself to whoever seems closest to the truth." "Then who sent him?" "Someone richer," Corrin replied. "Someone who collects history like trophies. Someone who wants the Chronicle not for truth, but for control." A shadow crossed her expression. "Miss Marple," she said softly, "you are in grave danger. Go home before you become a pawn in battles you cannot win." Miss Marple replied with her mild, steady tone. "My dear Dr. Corrin, you underestimate an old woman's ability to avoid becoming a pawn." Corrin's jaw tightened. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, her heels tapping sharply on the stone. Miss Marple watched her go, quietly noting something important. Corrin had not asked whether Miss Marple had seen the Chronicle fragments, meaning someone else had already told her, which meant Aslan was reporting to both sides, and perhaps to neither. Miss Marple resumed studying the base of the wall. The bronze clasp in her hand felt significant, too ornate to have been dropped casually, too well placed to be accidental. She examined the stone, where it had been hidden. The mortar line was uneven, newer than the surrounding stones. Someone had removed this particular block recently. She pressed against it lightly. It shifted, just slightly but enough. Miss Marple leaned her weight carefully and pushed. The stone moved inward with a soft grinding noise, revealing a shallow cavity behind it. Inside was a rolled parchment, this one protected by a layer of wax cloth. With calm dexterity, she withdrew it. It contained a map. A hand-drawn diagram of the Blachernae walls, showing a small tunnel branching beneath the tower and leading toward the Golden Gate, an ancient ceremonial entrance used by emperors, a tunnel known only to a few. Miss Marple whispered aloud, "A secret escape route." The Chronicle's claim of betrayal was gaining shape. If an officer inside the city had opened such a route or weakened its defenses, the fall might have been partly deliberate, and someone in the present had knowledge of this tunnel. She placed the map carefully into her notebook. Then she sensed it, a presence behind her, not Corin, not Arslan, someone heavier. Breathing harder, less subtle, Miss Marple turned just in time to see a broad-shouldered man reaching toward her. She stepped back swiftly, her cane ready, but he stopped before touching her. "You must come with me," he said in accented English. Miss Marple remained perfectly still. "On whose orders?" she asked. He hesitated. "You know who." "I'm afraid I do not." He shifted uncomfortably. "The collector." "Oh," the unnamed figure Corin had hinted at. The one who collected history like trophies. The one whose guard had pursued her underground. "I believe," Miss Marple said gently, "that I have no appointment with this collector." She turned her cane ever so slightly, its silver tip glinting. "To attempt to take me would be unwise." The man frowned. "You don't understand. He will." He suddenly stopped, eyes widening. Someone stood behind him, the older guide from Hagia Sophia. "Leave her," the guide said sharply. The man hesitated, then melted away into an archway of shadows. The guide stepped forward. "Are you hurt, Miss Marple?" "No," she said calmly. "But I suspect we have little time before he returns." The guide exhaled heavily. "I warned you. You should not be alone." "On the contrary," Miss Marple said softly, "being alone allows one to see more." The guide looked troubled. "You found another clue." "Yes. And now you must stop searching." Miss Marple regarded him with gentle firmness. "You keep advising me to stop, yet you leave clues for me to follow. That, sir, is contradictory." The guide's face tightened. "Because I am torn. There are people who want the Chronicle destroyed. Others want it revealed. Both factions are dangerous." "And you?" Miss Marple asked. He closed his eyes momentarily. When he opened them, they carried a deep sadness. "I was once a student of Arslan. I believed in him. I believed in truth. But when he discovered the first fragment, everything changed. He chose secrecy over scholarship." "Because the Chronicle threatens him?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes. His reputation, his theories, everything. He hides what he cannot control. And Dr. Corin, she wants to expose the Chronicle, no matter who gets hurt. And the collector, he wants to own history itself." Miss Marple absorbed this quietly. 3 forces, 3 ambitions, and she stood at the center. "Tell me," she said gently, who left the doorway open beneath Hagia Sophia. The guide looked down. "I did." Miss Marple nodded. Her instincts had said as much. "But why me?" she asked. The guide met her eyes. "Because you are the only one who cannot be corrupted. You are the only one who sees truth without wanting to own it." Miss Marple felt a quiet weight settle over her. "Then help me," she said. "Tell me everything you know about the night Constantinople fell." He hesitated, then whispered, "I will meet you tonight, at the Golden Gate ruins. There is one final clue I cannot carry alone." Miss Marple walked away from the guide slowly, her mind stitching facts together with the patient precision of a needle through fabric. A secret tunnel under the walls, fragments of a forbidden chronicle. 3 powerful rivals, a hidden betrayal across centuries. The Blachernae walls stood silent, their stones bearing witness to both ancient treachery and modern schemes. Miss Marple reached a quiet corner of the ruins and sat briefly on a low stone. She took out the parchment map again, studying the tunnel's path. The Golden Gate lay farther west, nearly at the edge of the ancient city. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the ground. Shadows that moved, at least 2 of them, belonging to people who kept their distance, but never left her alone. She closed her notebook and rose. If the guide spoke truth, tonight's meeting could be decisive, dangerous, even, but Miss Marple had never been deterred by danger. She adjusted her hat, straightened her coat, and began walking toward the distant ruins of the Golden Gate. Behind her, the watchers followed. Ahead of her, the truth waited. And the past was beginning to speak. Chapter 6. The Chronicle Thief. Evening in Istanbul descended like a curtain of amber and blue. Lanterns flickered to life, one by one, as Miss Marple made her way west, toward the ruins of the ancient Golden Gate. The marble arch, once the triumphal entrance of emperors, now stood lonely and fractured, half swallowed by shrubs and time. Miss Marple walked with steady resolve, her cane tapping rhythmically against the stone path. The map from the Blachernae walls remained folded in her coat pocket, warm from her body, but cold in implication. A secret tunnel, a betrayal within the city, fragments hidden underground, and tonight, perhaps, the truth. She arrived early on purpose. It had always been her belief that the first to arrive controls the field. She surveyed the area carefully. The Golden Gate stood tall, but broken, its once gilded marble now worn into shades of pale gold and grey. Evening shadows cast long fingers across the ground. Nearby, a low stretch of grass sloped toward the remains of an old turret. Beyond that, trees stood whispering in the cool wind, their branches moving like quiet conspirators. Miss Marple eased herself onto a stone block and waited, but she did not wait idly. Her eyes moved constantly quietly to the edges of the ruins. She noted the 2 men leaning too casually under a tree. She noticed the woman who passed the site twice, pretending to take photographs, but never adjusting her camera settings. She noticed a tall figure behind the gate, pretending to study the stone reliefs yet repeatedly looking sideways. Watchers, positioned deliberately. Miss Marple suspected none of them were tourists. Then she saw the guide, the older man who had warned her before, walking with brisk but cautious steps toward her. He reached her side, his face pale with urgency. "You came," he whispered. "You asked me to," Miss Marple replied with gentle firmness. He looked around nervously. "We have very little time. There is something I must show you before they come." "Who, precisely, are they?" Miss Marple asked. "The Chronicle thief," he said, "and those working for him." Miss Marple nodded once. "Then lead the way." The guide motioned her behind the arch, where the grass grew thick and the stone walls crumbled into uneven mounds. He pushed aside a clump of thorny bushes, revealing a narrow stone opening, just tall enough for a grown man to descend. A dark passage, old, damp, forgotten. "This," he said quietly, "is part of the tunnel shown on your map." Miss Marple studied the opening. "And you are certain this leads to the truth?" "I am certain," he said, "that it leads to what everyone is searching for." He climbed down first, offering his hand. Miss Marple accepted with dignity and surprising strength, lowering herself carefully onto the ancient steps. The air inside was cold, smelling faintly of mildew, old stone, and something else. Something metallic, almost like rusted iron. They walked in silence through the narrow passage. Overhead, the sound of footsteps and distant voices echoed faintly. Others were searching above ground. The guide held a small lantern. Its dim glow revealed carvings along the walls, crosses, monograms, and several scratched symbols identical to the ones Miss Marple had seen before. This place was once a hidden refuge, he explained, a secret meeting point for those who opposed the emperor's decisions or feared the Ottomans would breach the walls. They gathered here in the final days. And the Chronicle, Miss Marple asked. Part of it was copied here. The scribe Barbaro's assistant hid the duplicate pages, hoping they would survive even the city fell. And did they survive? Miss Marple asked. The guide hesitated. Some did. They reached a small chamber and Miss Marple immediately sensed something was wrong. The room had been ransacked. Broken crates lay scattered. Stone shelves had been scraped bare. Torn parchment shreds littered the floor. A heavy smell of damp ink filled the air. It wasn't like this before, the guide whispered in horror. Miss Marple knelt and touched a torn parchment scrap. The ink was still tacky. Whoever was here, she said softly, was here within hours. Perhaps minutes, the guide swallowed. He has beaten us to it. Who? Miss Marple asked quietly. The guide looked at her with haunted eyes. The collector. The thief who has been stealing fragments for years. They examined the room quickly but thoroughly. Miss Marple moved with her characteristic gentle precision, reading the room like a story. The shelves were emptied with haste, but also purpose-specific pieces had been taken. Other older scraps had been left behind, meaning the intruder knew what was valuable. A professional. Suddenly, a faint metallic click echoed through the chamber. Before either could react, the lantern dimmed as a tall shadow stepped into the room. You should not be here. The voice, cold as the Bosphorus winter wind, belonged to the guard Miss Marple had seen earlier, the one from Hagia Sophia. Behind him stood another man, thin, sharp-faced, carrying a leather satchel filled to its brim. Fragments, the Chronicle fragments, the Chronicle thief himself. The guard glared at Miss Marple. Hand over what you found. Miss Marple remained seated on the floor, her eyes calm behind her spectacles. I have nothing belonging to you. That is a lie, he said, raising his voice. No, Miss Marple responded serenely. It is a truth you do not care for. The Chronicle thief stepped forward, his eyes glittering with triumph. You led us here, old woman, you and your guide. Without your trail, we would never have found the hidden chamber. The guide stiffened in fury. We did not lead you, I tried to protect the truth. The thief sneered, you protected nothing. He held up a fragment large, intact, covered with dense handwriting. Miss Marple recognized the style immediately. This was important, maybe the key to everything. Give it to me, the guide demanded. The thief laughed. You are nothing but a failed apprentice. But he pointed at Miss Marple. She has caused enough trouble. I will not let an old tourist ruin my work. He moved toward her. Miss Marple did not flinch. Instead, she spoke with remarkable gentleness. You misunderstand. I am no tourist. And I am not alone. The thief froze. What? Footsteps thundered down the tunnel. Not one pair, not two, several. Dr. Oslan burst into the chamber first, followed closely by Dr. Corrin, and two men Miss Marple did not recognize, scholars, archivists, security. All armed only with determination. The thief panicked and fled deeper into the tunnel. The guard stayed behind, trying to hold them off, but Corrin confronted him sharply. Stand down. The guard hesitated briefly, then ran after the thief. The chase had begun. The guide moved to help Miss Marple stand. She brushed dust from her coat, collected her cane, and nodded. We must not let them escape. Arslan looked shaken. I never thought he would find this place. Miss Marple gave him a pointed glance. Your lack of thought has been a significant pattern, Dr. Oslan. Corrin stepped forward. Enough. We must intercept them before they reach the lower exit. There are two routes. Miss Marple examined the tunnel map quickly. If we go left, she said, we cut them off near the cistern beneath the wall. If we go right, we follow their path, but they have a head start. Corrin nodded. Left, then. They moved swiftly, Oslan holding the lantern, the guide supporting Miss Marple down uneven steps. Despite her age, Miss Marple navigated the tunnel with astonishing surety. Her eyes saw every detail. Her mind stayed clear. They reached a junction where the tunnel split. Miss Marple raised a hand. Stop. Faintly, very faintly, she heard water. They went right, she whispered, toward the cistern, perhaps hoping to escape through the broken drainage tunnels. Corin narrowed her eyes. How do you know? Miss Marple lifted her cane and pointed at the ground. A fresh droplet of water. They brushed against a damp surface. Corin blinked. You saw that? No, Miss Marple said mildly. I observed it. They followed the sound of water. The tunnel opened suddenly into a wide, dark cistern half flooded, its stone pillars rising from shallow pools. Their footfalls echoed ominously. Lantern light flickered on the water's surface, like trembling fire. And there, across the cistern, Miss Marple saw him. The Chronicle thief struggling to open a small iron hatch that led deeper underground. The guard tried to force it open with brute strength. Stop, Corin shouted. The thief turned, eyes wild. You don't understand, he cried. This Chronicle, it's not just history. It reveals the truth about modern Byzantium scholars, about corruption, about everything. Miss Marple stepped forward slowly. And you intend to own the truth? To control it, to decide who sees it. The thief's face twisted. Someone must. Miss Marple shook her head softly. Truth belongs to all or to none. He tried to flee, but the old iron hatch slipped in his hands, slamming shut with a deafening clang. He stumbled backward, losing his balance. The satchel tore open. Fragments spilled into the water, floating, sinking, scattering across the ancient cistern. Corin gasped. No, stop. She leapt forward, reaching for the papers. Aslan joined her. The guide tried too, shouting in desperation. The thief scrambled to gather what he could, slipping on the wet stones. Miss Marple, however, did not move toward the water. Her eyes were fixed on one fragment still clutched in the thief's hand. The largest one, the one he had shown earlier. The one that mattered most. She approached him calmly. Give it to me. Never, he snarled, but the guard cried out suddenly. The cistern floor beneath him cracked, a piece giving way. Water surged through. The thief panicked, clutching the fragment tighter, and in that moment of fear, Miss Marple swiftly struck his wrist with her cane. The fragment flew into the air. She caught it with both hands, as delicately as one catches a bird. The thief stared at her in shock. Corin and Aslan froze. The guide whispered, You have it, the page that names the betrayer. Miss Marple held the dripping parchment gently, her voice steady. No, she said softly, it is not a page that names the betrayer. It is a page that clears him. Silence fell like a stone. The truth had turned. And the real betrayal, past and present, was only beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 7. The Forgotten Library. Miss Marple stood in the dim cistern chamber, holding the damp fragment with the delicate steadiness of a surgeon. The others, Corin, Aslan, the guide, watched her with a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. The Chronicle thief lay stunned on the ground, his wrist throbbing where her cane had struck. She unfolded the fragment carefully. The ink, though blurred slightly by the water, remained legible. What she saw confirmed her suspicion. The passage did not accuse Lucas Notar as the famed Byzantine officer, long rumoured by ambitious scholars to have betrayed the city. Instead, it described him as a man torn between loyalty and despair, exhausted from defending the walls 4 days. The passage ended with a line most modern historians had never seen. He warned the emperor thrice, but was not heard. Miss Marple's voice was soft but clear as she read aloud. He did not weaken the wall, nor invite the foe. He fought until his last strength, and his blood washed the stones he swore to defend. Corin stepped back in shock. This absolves him, completely. Aslan swallowed hard. This destroys my entire research thesis, the guide whispered, and this threatens the collector's entire empire. Miss Marple gently placed the fragment into her notebook for safekeeping. We must assume others already know about this page, and will soon discover it is missing. The thief groaned from the ground. You don't understand. You've only seen one part. You think that page holds the truth. It holds only the beginning. Miss Marple turned her calm gaze upon him. Then show us the rest. The thief's eyes flicked with hesitation, then defiance. I can't. I don't have it all. Then who does? Miss Marple asked. He swallowed. No, Tara's was innocent, but another wasn't, and the Chronicle pages proving it weren't kept underground. They were hidden somewhere else, somewhere older, somewhere sacred. Corin leaned forward. Where? The thief's voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. The monastery at Fina. The forgotten library. The guide stiffened. Impossible. That library burned centuries ago. No, the thief said. It never burned. It was sealed. Miss Marple nodded slowly. The real truth lay ahead. As they emerged from the tunnel, the sky outside had darkened almost completely. Istanbul's evening light shimmered across the distant Bosphorus like scattered gold dust. But tonight, the city felt different, hostile, alert, shifting. Miss Marple adjusted her coat, her mind already forming a plan. Aslan approached her, hesitant. You mean to go to Fina tonight? Yes, Miss Marple replied softly. That area is dangerous after dark. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled slightly, as is withholding the truth. Corin stepped forward. I'm going too. My research may be shattered, but I still want the truth. Aslan looked ashamed. I will help as well. Miss Marple turned to the guide. And you? He nodded firmly. I know the old paths. The hidden entrances. You will need me. Miss Marple regarded him a moment, then nodded. Very well. Before leaving, she turned to the Chronicle thief. You may stay here and wait for the authorities, or run and face the collector. Your choice. He trembled. He'll kill me. Miss Marple sighed softly. Then perhaps, for once, choose the honest path. Without another word, she led the group out of the cistern. Their footsteps echoed with purpose. Above them, Istanbul's ancient stones seemed to shift like watchful eyes. The journey to Fina took them through winding streets, past old wooden houses and dimly lit alleyways. The golden horn glimmered faintly through gaps between buildings. Miss Marple noticed they were being followed. 3 figures, one behind, 2 ahead, pretending to linger. She spoke quietly without turning. We are not alone, the guide tensed. The collector's men, perhaps, Miss Marple murmured, but I suspect Aslan and Corin have their own watchers as well. Aslan flushed. I may have informed a colleague. And I, Corin admitted grudgingly, told one of my assistants I was following a lead. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Intellectual ambition is a wonderfully predictable vice. They continued walking, weaving through archways and stairs until they reached a tall, unmarked stone building, its windows bricked over, its doorway sealed by a heavy iron plate. This is it, the guide whispered. The old monastery library, Corin scoffed. It looks like a storage cellar. It was altered deliberately, the guide said, to hide what was inside. Miss Marple approached the iron door. She examined the edges closely. They're the faint outline of a Byzantine cross, nearly erased. Can it be opened? She asked. The guide knelt beside the frame and pressed his fingers against a certain stone. A soft click echoed. A hidden mechanism. The iron door shifted, then slowly creaked open. Miss Marple stepped inside first. The forgotten library was nothing like she expected. The air inside was cold and dry, preserved by ancient engineering. Tall wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls, manuscripts, stones engraved with Greek, Latin, and early Ottoman script, rows upon rows of knowledge, frozen in time. Corin gasped softly. This is impossible. This is a treasure worth nations. Aslan touched a scroll reverently. These are originals, uncatalogued, untouched for centuries. Miss Marple's gaze moved across the shelves with calm precision. The Chronicle fragments would not be in the open. They would be hidden behind something symbolic, meaningful. Look, she said. In the far corner stood a small alcove crowned by a faded mosaic of an angel with broken wings. The guide inhaled sharply, the symbol of secrecy. This is where forbidden writings were kept. Miss Marple approached, her cane tapping lightly. She reached behind the mosaic, feeling along the stones. Her fingers brushed a thin wooden box. She drew it out carefully. It was smaller than the one beneath Hagia Sophia, more fragile, decorated with a single carved feather. She opened it. Inside lay 3 parchment fragments each with the same handwriting as the Chronicle. Miss Marple spread them on a table. The group huddled around her as she read. The first fragment described a council meeting during the siege. The second spoke of dissent among the emperor's advisors. The third, Corin gasped. This names the traitor, Miss Marple read aloud. Not the general, nor the admiral, but the monk who held the keys. Aslan staggered backward. A monk, not a soldier. Brother Isakios, Corin whispered, reading the name etched in fading ink. He oversaw the northern gates. He was responsible for the final watch. Miss Marple nodded, and he opened a passage. The guide spoke in awe. Not Notaras, not the emperor, a monk. A frightened man, Miss Marple said gently. A man who believes surrender would spare lives. Aslan whispered, this overturns hundreds of years of scholarship. Corin's eyes gleamed with triumph and fear. This changes everything. Miss Marple gathered the fragments. It changes history. The door behind them slammed. They spun around. The iron door had shut. Someone stood silhouetted against faint lamplight from outside. The collector. A tall, elegant man with cold composure, and eyes that glittered like polished obsidian. Behind him stood 2 guards, the same ones who had stalked Miss Marple earlier. I see, he said softly, stepping into the library, that you have found the truth. Corin stepped forward instinctively. This library belongs to the world. It belongs, the collector said calmly, to the one who controls it. Aslan clenched his fists. You would bury centuries of knowledge. Knowledge, the collector replied, is power. And power must never be free. He turned to Miss Marple, his tone shifting. You, however, are a complication. Miss Marple's eyes held steady. Truth rarely sits comfortably with those who fear it. The collector smiled. And that, Miss Marple, is why I cannot allow you to leave with those pages. He stepped closer, too close. The guards moved to block the exit. Aslan whispered, he means to trap us here. And then destroy the evidence. Corin breathed. Miss Marple held the Chronicle fragments behind her back. Calm, steady, sharp as a needle. She whispered to the guide, there must be a second exit. Ancient libraries always had escape routes. There is, he murmured. But it leads downward. Then downward we go. Miss Marple stepped back toward the shadowed corner of the library. The collector advanced, but he stopped when she spoke. You have miscalculated, sir. The collector narrowed his eyes. How? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Because you are standing beneath a mosaic that is older than your ambition and weaker than your greed. The collector frowned, just as the ceiling above him cracked. A fracture ran across the mosaic like splitting ice. The ancient stones shifted. Dust fell. The library groaned. The collector stumbled backward as a section of the ceiling collapsed, blocking the entrance, trapping him and his guards behind fallen stone. Corin gasped. Miss Marple, how did you know? Miss Marple lifted her cane and tapped the ground softly. I observed the weakened mortar, and men blinded by arrogance rarely look up. The guide pointed toward a dark passage beneath the shelves. The escape route, Miss Marple nodded. Everyone this way. She led them into the shadows, carrying the fragments of the Chronicle with her. Behind them, the collector shouted in fury. Ahead of them, the tunnel sloped downward, leading deeper into the ancient city. The truth was in their hands, but danger was now on their heels. And Miss Marple understood something finally. The past was no longer the only threat. The present was becoming far more perilous. Chapter 8. The Chase Through the Bazaar. The secret tunnel beneath the forgotten library sloped steeply downward, its walls narrowing as the group advanced. Miss Marple walked at the center, her cane tapping carefully in the darkness. The Chronicle fragments, now wrapped securely, were tucked beneath her coat. Behind them, the collapsing stones muffled the collector's enraged shouts. But Miss Marple knew he would not remain trapped for long. The guide led the way with a flickering lantern. Arslan and Coran followed close behind, their breathing tight from the shock of what had just happened. "The tunnel leads toward the old cistern network," the guide whispered. "From there to the bazaar." "Good," Miss Marple said softly. "A crowd provides cover." Coran nodded sharply. "And danger. He will expect us to hide among people." Arslan wiped sweat from his brow. "He will release his men. The bazaar will be crawling with them." Miss Marple's voice remained calm. "Then we must use their expectation against them." They walked faster. The tunnel floor grew more uneven, its stones slick with moisture. The damp air thickened, carrying scents of moss and ancient dust. Eventually, the narrow passage widened, and faint echoes reached them, dripping water, distant activity, and the muted hum of a living city. They entered a vast, abandoned cistern where pillars rose like ghostly trees from shallow water. Lantern-light cast long shadows across the walls. Across the chamber, a stairway rose toward daylight. "Our exit," the guide said. Miss Marple paused only a moment, listening, always listening. Voices, distant, beckoning. She urged the group forward. They climbed the steps and pushed open a rusted iron grate. A burst of warm air greeted them, scented with spices, roasted nuts, leather, and incense. They had emerged behind a row of carpet stalls in the sprawling Grand Bazaar. The chase had brought them to one of the most crowded places in the world. The bazaar pulsed with life, voices in multiple languages, bargaining cries, laughter, footsteps, and the steady thrumming of human activity packed into narrow aisles. Miss Marple tightened her grip on her cane and stepped out into the flow of people with surprising agility. Coran moved beside her protectively. "We must blend in. We must also avoid being predictable," Miss Marple replied. Arslan kept glancing behind them nervously. "How long do you think until the collector's men reach this place?" "Minutes," the guide murmured. "He has informants everywhere." Miss Marple observed her surroundings, the patterns of movement, the clusters of shoppers, the locations where newcomers entered. Then she noticed something, a pair of men entering one of the main aisles, moving quickly, scanning faces. Their posture marked them immediately, hunters, not shoppers. Another appeared near the jewelry stalls. A fourth leaned casually against a doorway, pretending to inspect pottery. "They are here," Miss Marple whispered. Coran cursed under her breath. Arslan froze. "What do we do?" Miss Marple's eyes sparkled with calm clarity. "We divide." "What?" Coran hissed. "If we stay together, we move like a target, separate, and they must choose a direction." Coran hesitated. "That is risky. Truth often is," Miss Marple said gently. Arslan swallowed. "Who keeps the fragments?" Miss Marple looked at him with gentle firmness. "I do." "They will not expect an elderly woman to be the one carrying them." Coran shook her head. "They are specifically looking for you, Miss Marple." "Yes," she said. "But they underestimate me." "That is their mistake." The guide stepped forward. "I will stay with her." "No," Miss Marple replied. "Your knowledge of the tunnels will help the others escape if needed. Go with Dr. Coran and Dr. Arslan. Create confusion." The three exchanged a tense glance, then nodded reluctantly. Miss Marple straightened her coat, adjusted her hat, and stepped calmly into the crowd alone. The bazaar's labyrinthine corridors twisted and turned, each corner bursting with color, noise, and movement. Miss Marple used her small stature and quiet presence to slip unnoticed through groups of shoppers. She passed a lantern store glowing with warm gold and crimson light. She paused near a spice merchant whose pyramids of powders, lit the air with saffron, cinnamon, and crushed rose. She drifted past a ceramics shop overflowing with turquoise tiles. Her cane tapped gently, rhythmically, blending with the sounds around her. But her mind was sharp, alert to every shadow. One of the collector's men appeared in the distance, walking against the flow, scanning the crowd. Then another turned into the same aisle from the opposite direction. They were closing in. Miss Marple stepped sideways into a leather goods stall, pretending to examine handbags. The shopkeeper approached. "Madam, finest quality." "Thank you, dear," she said with soft politeness, "but I'm afraid I'm only hiding from a rather insistent admirer." The shopkeeper blinked, then laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. Miss Marple slipped out the back exit of the stall just as the two guards passed. She continued down a quieter aisle, listening closely. Behind her, footsteps quickened. Ahead, more men approached. She was being herded, not toward a stall, but toward a dead end. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Ah," she murmured, "how tiresome." She reached the end of the aisle. A curtain hung across the stone wall, decorative, concealing nothing. Except, Miss Marple noticed the slightest puff of moving air behind it. A gap, an old service passage. She slipped behind the curtain, just as a guard turned the corner. The passageway beyond was narrow, dusty, and lined with old storage crates. She moved quickly but carefully, her cane tapping softly. Then, from the shadows behind a stack of crates, a low voice whispered, "Miss Marple." She stopped. The guide stepped out from behind the crates, breathless but relieved. "I followed one of the men. I knew they were pushing you toward a trap." Miss Marple nodded. "You read their movement well." "I've seen these hunters before," he replied. "They use the same patterns in narrow streets." "What of Coron and Aslan?" she asked. "I led them toward the Egyptian bazaar. They have a better chance of escape there." Miss Marple gave a small approving nod. "But," the guide continued, "we still need to get you out." Miss Marple considered their surroundings. The passage had several branching corridors, old merchants' walkways, storage hallways, and maintenance routes. "A maze within a maze. We need to mislead them," she said. The guide hesitated. "But how?" Miss Marple slipped the Chronicle fragments from her coat and handed them to him. "Hide these in a different corridor," she said calmly. "Move swiftly, then return." He froze. "But the collector's men want the pages. If they find me—" "They won't," Miss Marple replied gently. "They will still expect me to carry them." The guide stared at her, realizing the brilliance of her plan. "You will mislead them," he said. "And you," Miss Marple added, "will protect history." The guide nodded once firmly, then vanished into a side passage with the precious fragments. Miss Marple waited. Soon, footsteps thundered into the corridor behind her. She walked calmly into the main aisle. A guard spotted her immediately. "There, she has the pages." Miss Marple smiled mildly. "Oh dear," the chase erupted. Miss Marple moved through the bazaar with surprising agility. Not fast, but clever. She stepped behind merchants at exactly the right moment. She paused as groups crossed her path, letting crowds obscure her movements. She used every turn, every blind corner, every shift in lighting. The guards grew agitated. "She's heading toward the lamp quarter." "No, she went left. I saw her cane this way." Miss Marple slipped into a stall illuminated by hundreds of hanging glass lamps. The sudden brightness disoriented the pursuers. She moved through the shop and exited on the opposite side, emerging into an aisle that split in 3 directions. Behind her, the guards burst into the lamp shop and shouted wildly. Shoppers panicked, scattering in all directions. Chaos bloomed. Miss Marple walked straight ahead, calm in the storm. But then, a familiar voice echoed, "Miss Marple." The guide emerged from a side corridor, breathless. "They didn't see me hide the fragments." "Excellent," she said softly. "Then let us leave before they realize their mistake." They moved toward an exit near the spice market, slipping unnoticed into the open air. Behind them, the bazaar continued to rumble with confusion, the collector's men furious at their failure, shouting orders, scattering through the maze. The guide exhaled deeply. We escaped. Miss Marple shook her head gently. No, we survived. Escape will come only after the truth is safe. She looked toward the city's silhouette, its domes glowing in the evening light. It is time, she said softly, to confront the final witness. The guide swallowed. The one who wrote the Chronicle. Miss Marple nodded. The meaning of the past lies not in pages alone, but in the hand that wrote them. And thus the last, most dangerous step of their journey awaited them. The scribe's resting place, the final truth. The final betrayal, past and present. Miss Marple tightened her grip on her cane. The end was approaching. Chapter 9. The Truth of the Fall. Night had fully wrapped itself around Istanbul by the time Miss Marple and the guide reached the hill overlooking the Church of St. Mary of the Mongols, a centuries-old red brick sanctuary, tucked deep within the narrow streets of Fina. Lantern light glowed faintly from nearby houses, casting orange halos across cobblestones darkened by the sea breeze. Miss Marple paused at the crest of the hill, her breath steady despite the long climb. "You're certain?" she asked softly. The guide nodded. "Yes. Barbaro's assistant, the man who wrote the hidden sections of the Chronicle, was buried here. He took monastic vows after the fall. If any truth remained unwritten, any confession, it would have been left in his final refuge." Miss Marple looked toward the church, its slanted dome gleaming faintly under the moon. "Then this is where the truth ends or begins again." They descended toward the church's arched entrance. The gate was locked, but the guide produced a small brass key. "An old priest gave this to me," he whispered. "He believed the scribe's spirit still guards his words." Miss Marple gave a gentle smile. "Truth often earns its guardians." The gate creaked open. They entered the quiet courtyard. Ancient gravestones stood like tired sentinels. Beyond them, the church doors loomed, carved with weathered icons. As they approached, Miss Marple stopped suddenly. There on the wooden door someone had marked a symbol. A half-circle with 3 vertical strokes, freshly carved. The Chronicle's trail had reached its final door. Miss Marple touched the symbol lightly with her gloved fingers. "He led us here," she murmured. "The scribe. Or someone following his path." The guide swallowed. "Then the last truth is inside." Miss Marple nodded. They pushed open the doors and stepped into the dimness, where the final answers waited. Inside, the church was silent except for the soft crackle of candles burning near the iconostasis. The air carried the smell of beeswax, and old incense, timeless, solemn. Arched walls curved above them like protective wings. Faded frescoes watched from the shadows, their colors worn but dignified. Miss Marple walked slowly, her cane tapping lightly. She felt the weight of history not as a burden, but as a presence, old, watchful, patient. The guide approached a side altar where a small brass plate bore a name. Iones Marcos, monk of the last days. This was him, the guide whispered, Barbaro's assistant. Miss Marple knelt beside the grave, her eyes scanning the surrounding stonework. "If he hid something," she murmured, "it would be near where he prayed." She touched the floor. One tile, a modest square beneath the altar, felt loose. The guide knelt beside her. "You see everything." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "One simply sees what one pays attention to." Together they lifted the loose tile. Beneath it lay a small cavity, and inside it a rolled parchment sealed with darkened wax. Not wax of the 1400s, but wax melted more recently. Miss Marple lifted the parchment gently. "Someone opened this and resealed it." The guide's breath caught. "Who?" Miss Marple examined the faint grooves in the wax. "The collector, perhaps, or someone close to him." She broke the seal and unrolled the parchment slowly. Handwriting slanted elegantly across the page, familiar, but calmer than the earlier fragments. This was the last confession of Iones Marcos. Miss Marple began to read aloud. "I write this not for glory, nor for reward, but to unburden a soul that lived through fire." The parchment described the siege, fear, starvation, prayers whispered through broken walls, but the final paragraphs held the revelation. The scribe confirmed that Brother Isakios, a monk entrusted with the northern gate, had opened it not out of malice, but out of desperate hope that surrender would save the city's children. But there was more. The scribe wrote, "I saw another shadow, that night one not recorded. A man who urged Isakios to open the gate, a foreigner. A Venetian seeking advantage when the city fell." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. The guide whispered, "A Venetian." "Yes," Miss Marple said softly, "someone who profited from the fall." The parchment continued, "I knew him only by his mark." Beside the words, the scribe had drawn a small sigil. A double-headed eagle clutching a quill. The guide gasped. "That is the emblem of a Venetian merchant guild, a wealthy one." Miss Marple nodded slowly. The guild that centuries later became the collector's ancestral family. The revelation hit like a silent avalanche. The collector's obsession with the Chronicle, his desire to hide truth, his pursuit of fragments, all came from this. His family's secret role in the Fall of Constantinople, a legacy of betrayal. Miss Marple rolled the parchment and tucked it into her coat. The guide whispered, "We must leave before he finds us." But they were already too late. Footsteps echoed at the entrance. The church door slammed open. The collector stood there, dust-covered from the falling masonry, but composed. His guards flanked him, lanterns held high, his eyes locked onto Miss Marple. "Return what you have," he said coldly. Miss Marple remained calm. "You seek to erase your family's stain from history." "My family built empires," the collector snarled. "I will not have that destroyed by a senile old woman and a failed scholar." The guide stepped forward angrily. "You have no right." A guard struck him across the jaw, sending him to the ground. Miss Marple's cane tightened in her hand. Corin's voice echoed suddenly from the shadows. "And you have no right to this library." She emerged from behind a column breathless, defiant, followed by Aslan. They had tracked Miss Marple. "You will not take her," Corin said. The collector's smile turned razor-sharp. "I already have." He motioned his guards forward. But Miss Marple raised her hand gently. "I would not proceed," she said softly. "And why not?" the collector demanded. Miss Marple tapped the stone beneath her. "This church is built on layered foundations. Sound travels differently through uneven floors." The collector blinked, confused. Miss Marple continued, "Your footsteps echoed only once when you entered. But when your guard stepped forward," she tapped again. "I heard a hollow reverberation." Arslan's eyes widened. "She's right, the floor." Miss Marple pointed her cane. "The stone beneath your men is unstable. A cavity, possibly a forgotten grave chamber." The collector's eyes widened with dawning horror. Just as one of his guards shifted his weight, the floor beneath him cracked. Stone caved inward. He plunged downward with a shout. The floor around him crumbled, an ancient structural weakness revealed. The collector staggered backward as the second guard grabbed his arm to keep from falling. Miss Marple stepped backward calmly. "You seek to bury the truth," she said gently, "yet it seems the past prefers to bury those who try." The collector cursed and scrambled away from the collapsing stone. Miss Marple motioned to the others. Now, they fled into the shadowed corridor behind the altar. The collector shouted orders, but the weakened floor slowed him. By the time he reached solid ground, Miss Marple and her group had vanished into the crypt passage. The crypt beneath the church was a narrow labyrinth of small chambers, candle niches, and old tomb inscriptions. Their footsteps echoed softly as they descended deeper. Guided only by a single lantern, the guide managed to save. Aslan clutched his shoulder, bruised but determined. Corin walked briskly, fury sharpening her movements. The guide walked ahead, holding the lantern high. Miss Marple remained in the centrecom, composed, unstoppable. Corin glanced at her. "How did you know the floor would give way?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "An old building tells its secrets to those who listen. Stone speaks in echoes." Aslan shook his head with incredulous admiration. "You saved our lives." "No," Miss Marple said gently, "I merely paid attention." They reached the bottom of the crypt stairs and entered a chamber with 3 branching tunnels. The guide hesitated. Which path? Miss Marple closed her eyes, listened. A faint rush of outside wind drifted from the leftmost tunnel. That way, she said. They moved through the tunnel until a small, rusted door appeared ahead. The guide forced it open. Fresh air rushed in. They stepped outside into the quiet courtyard, behind the church hidden from the street. The night sky stretched above them, stars faint in the distant haze. Corin exhaled. We're safe. But Miss Marple shook her head. No, not yet. They rested briefly under a fig tree in the courtyard. Miss Marple unrolled the scribe's final confession and read through the lines once more. When she finished, her expression held a gravity none of the others had seen before. This, she said, is the most important part. She pointed to a final paragraph. I hid pages in 3 places, one in the cistern, one in the library, and one with my own body. That truth may never be lost entirely. Corin gasped. So there is a 3rd fragment? No, Miss Marple said softly. Not anymore. She looked toward the church behind them. They disturbed the grave long ago. The 3rd page is dust. Aslan shook his head. Then the full truth can never be known. Miss Marple smiled gently. Sometimes fragments are enough. We now know the fall of Constantinople was not caused by a single betrayal or a single hero. She continued. It fell because men were frightened, because leaders were divided, because hope was lost. A monk opened the gate. A Venetian whispered in his ear. Soldiers fought bravely. Civilians suffered. It was not treachery or cowardice alone, but humanity, in all its weakness and complexity. Corin wiped a tear she did not expect. Aslan whispered, then history is neither blame nor glory. No, Miss Marple agreed. History is truth. And truth is rarely simple. The guide looked at her with profound respect. What will you do now? Miss Marple folded the parchments carefully. Ensure the truth reaches those who will preserve it, not exploit it. Before anyone could speak further, a distant sound echoed through the narrow streets. Bootsteps, angry voices. The collector's men had regrouped. Miss Marple rose with measured grace. It is time, she said. For the final step, she tightened her grip on her cane. The truth was hers to deliver, and the danger was closing fast. But Miss Marple had never been closer to victory, or to peril. Chapter 10. Miss Marple's Final Report. The narrow streets of Fena rang with hurried footsteps and distant shouts as Miss Marple led the small group toward the shore. Lantern lights flickered in windows. The Bosphorus wind rushed through the alleys, carrying with it the cold tension of pursuit. Behind them, the collector's men spread through the district searching, calling orders, overturning carts, demanding entry into homes. Yet Miss Marple moved with calm precision, steering the group through passages so narrow the moonlight barely reached the ground. The guide walked just ahead, lanterns shuttered to avoid detection. Corin stayed close to Miss Marple's side, while Aslan followed behind, glancing nervously over his shoulder. We cannot outrun them forever, Aslan whispered. No, Miss Marple replied gently, but we do not need to. What do you mean? Corin asked. Miss Marple stopped at a corner overlooking the Golden Horn, its waters shimmering with moonlit ripples. Boats rocked gently against old wooden piers. The faint sound of oars and laughter drifted from the far shore. She looked at the others with clear, steady eyes. We do not escape by running, she said softly. We escape by ending the chase. Corin frowned. How? Miss Marple opened her handbag and removed the sealed envelope she had prepared earlier in the church courtyard. I am delivering the truth, she said. To those who guard history, not to those who wish to bury it. Aslan blinked. To whom? Miss Marple pointed across the water, to the Patriarchate Archive. Their scholars will protect the fragments. The collector cannot touch them there, not legally, not quietly. The guide nodded, understanding, and we crossed the water from here unseen. Miss Marple smiled faintly, precisely. Then she added softly, and once the truth is out of his reach, the collector's pursuit becomes meaningless. The distant shouts grew louder. Miss Marple took a deep breath. It is time. They reached the pier, where a single small fishing boat was tied loosely to a post. An old fisherman sat in it, mending nets under the dim glow of a lantern. He looked up as the group approached. The guide spoke to him in Turkish quiet words, urgent. The fisherman listened carefully, then nodded. His face bore the calm resignation of someone who had seen danger cross these waters for decades. He gestured them aboard. Miss Marple stepped into the boat first, balanced and composed. Corin and Aslan followed, their breaths white in the night air. The guide untied the rope. The fisherman dipped his oar silently into the water. The boat glided away from the shore. Miss Marple watched the city recede, the winding alleys, the narrow homes, the minarets rising like silent guardians. Behind them, torchlights moved through the streets, like hunters searching for prey. She felt the Chronicle fragments secure beneath her coat, a fragile truth crossing a sea of danger. Corin exhaled shakily. We made it. Miss Marple shook her head gently. Not yet. Because from the shore, she saw figures gathering. The collector's men had reached the waterfront. One of them shouted. Another pointed. A whistle cut the air. The collector himself appeared seconds later, his expression dark with fury. His coat flapped violently in the wind as he strode down the pier. Miss Marple kept her gaze steady on him, her face unreadable. He yelled something she could not hear, an order, a curse, a threat. The fisherman paddled faster, but the men on shore were lowering a motorboat into the water. Arslan's breath hitched. They're coming after us. Corin whispered. We'll never reach the other side in time. Miss Marple raised a hand. Stay calm. Her voice was steady, not loud, but filled with an authority that stilled even the water. She turned to the fisherman. Angle us toward the shadows of Balit. If they lose sight, we gain time. The fisherman nodded grimly and shifted course. The boat slipped behind a cluster of anchored vessels, temporarily concealed. The motorboat roared to life. The chase had begun. The motorboat swerved across the Golden Horn, scanning the water like a hunting bird. Its light pierced the darkness in sweeping arcs. Miss Marple sat perfectly still, her hands folded on her cane, her eyes reflecting the glow of lanterns and moonlight. She seemed almost serene, an island of composure in a sea of danger. The guide crouched low. If they find us. They won't, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but absolute. Corin whispered. How can you be so certain? Miss Marple did not look away from the water. Because the collector is blinded by his rage. Rage leads to haste. And haste, my dear, leads to poor choices. Arslan stared at her. You're astonishing. No, Miss Marple said, just observant. The motorboat turned sharply. Its light passed dangerously close. The guide held his breath. Arslan shut his eyes. Corin gripped the edge of the boat, and Miss Marple gently tapped the fisherman's shoulder. Now, she whispered. He changed course again, this time ducking into a narrow path between two moored cargo vessels. The motorboat's light swept past, missing them by seconds. The water rippled with the wake. Miss Marple drew a slow breath. Patience, she murmured. Outrun nothing. Outweight everything. Moments later, they drifted out from the shadow of the larger ships. The motorboat had overshot them, heading toward the far mouth of the bay. They were safe. The fisherman pointed ahead. Patriarchate Pier. Miss Marple nodded. The final steps were near. They disembarked at a modest stone quay beside the Patriarchate Archive, a fortified complex built over centuries, with high walls, secure gates, and a reputation for guarding historical documents with absolute neutrality. An elderly archivist stood waiting under a lantern. He wore long robes, his white beard shining softly in the flicker of light. You must be the one they warned me of, he said in accented English. Miss Marple inclined her head. I am the one carrying the truth. He extended his hands. Then the truth will be safe here. Miss Marple opened her handbag and presented the sealed envelope, the one containing the scribe's confession, and the 2 Chronicle fragments that had survived. The archivist accepted them with great reverence. "I will place them in the restricted chamber. Only the council may access them." Corin sighed with relief. "Then the collector cannot reach them?" "No," the archivist said firmly, "not without declaring war on history itself." Arslan exhaled shakily. "Thank goodness." But Miss Marple remained still. She looked at the archivist with a thoughtful expression. "Truth should be protected," she said softly, "but not hidden." "Will these documents be studied?" "Yes," the archivist replied. "Translated, verified, and preserved. Scholars worldwide will know the truth of the fall. No one will control that narrative again." Miss Marple smiled a small, weary smile of deep satisfaction. Then, she whispered, "My work is done." Corin stepped forward. "You saved history." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "No, my dear. I merely rescued it from those who feared it." By the time Miss Marple and the others reached the hill above the Golden Horn, dawn was beginning to rise. The first light brushed the domes of the city, casting rose gold over the ancient skyline. The night's danger had passed. The truth was secure, and Istanbul breathed again. Corin looked at Miss Marple. "What now?" Miss Marple gazed at the horizon, her gentle smile illuminated by the coming day. "Now," she said softly, "we let history speak for itself." Arslan bowed his head. "I will begin my research anew. This time, grounded in truth." Corin nodded. "And I will publish what must be known." The guide placed a hand over his heart. "I will guard the tunnels and those who seek truth." Miss Marple touched his arm lightly. "You have been brave, my dear." He lowered his eyes. "Because you showed me how." They stood in silence for a long moment as the sun rose higher, its light revealing the full sweep of the city that had been at the heart of empires, wars, faiths, and betrayals. Istanbul glowed. Miss Marple breathed deeply. "I once believed," she said quietly, "that mysteries belonged to small villages, simple crimes, and human mischief. But history is the greatest mystery of all." Corin smiled. "And you solved it." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "I solved only a small part. Enough to remind us that truth is never buried forever." A carriage approached the hill, arranged by the archivist. Miss Marple turned toward the group. "Then I suppose it is time I return home." "But Miss Marple," Arslan said, "won't you miss Istanbul?" Miss Marple looked out at the city one last time, its streets, its minarets, its great domes standing proud. "Yes," she said, "but mysteries tend to follow me. And I believe St. Mary Mead may have missed me as well." The guide bowed respectfully. Corin clasped her hands gratefully. Arslan whispered, "Safe travels." Miss Marple stepped into the carriage. As it carried her toward the airport, she looked back at the city, its past now settled, its truth safeguarded. And she whispered to herself, "History is simply another crime scene. And the truth, however old, deserves